The naive victim, the skilled manipulator, a symbol of love and pain, the unhappy wife and the cynical cheater, the aristocrat and the girl from the people. She's been described in countless ways, yet uncovering the real Diana has never been easy. But no matter what anyone says, Princess Di remains one of the most famous women of the 20th century. A woman who broke the royal family's rules and paid a heavy price for it, because the moment she stepped onto the path to the throne, intrigue, loneliness, and an inevitable tragic fate were already waiting for her. Why was the future princess crying even before her wedding? Was she really ready to leave her children for love? Who pushed her into giving the most shocking televised interview of the 20th century? And why? And is it true that Diana stalked her lovers? In this video, we won't just list the facts. We'll relive the story of a woman who started a revolution with her heart. This is the biography of Princess Diana, a story that still stings. I was quiet, very quiet, but that didn't mean nothing was happening inside me. Diana Frances Spencer was born on July 1, 1961, in Sandringham, Norfolk, into the aristocratic Spencer family. Her ancestors belonged to one of Britain's most prominent noble lineages. Her father, Edward John Spencer, was the heir to the Spencer Churchills, which included the more famous Duke of Marlborough and Winston Churchill. It's believed he was a descendant of King Charles II and King James II. Charles was notorious for his many affairs and illegitimate children, so this branch of the family was a side branch. At the time of Diana's birth, her father held the title of Viscount Althorp, while her mother, Frances Shand Kidd, came from a line of barons and had even served in Queen Elizabeth II's court. The Earl Spencer had long resided in the heart of London at Spencer House, and Edward John Spencer himself served in the court of King George VI. So, young Diana was no simple country girl, as some biographers like to portray. She grew up side by side with the royal family, even playing with Prince Andrew as a child. But her childhood was far from a fairy tale. From the moment she was born, she was a disappointment. Not her fault, of course, it was simpler than that. Di wasn't a boy. By the time she arrived, the Spencers already had 2 older daughters, and a baby boy, John, had died just hours after birth, a year before Diana's arrival. The family was left without an heir, and the loss of John cast a dark shadow over the household, straining her parents' marriage. The pressure on Diana's mother to produce a son was immense, from both the family and aristocratic society. In the biography, Diana, Her True Story by Andrew Morton, it was noted that her father was deeply upset, and Diana herself later admitted in private, "When I was born, my parents were disappointed. They wanted a boy. I was called the second attempt." The book also mentions that right after Diana's birth, her mother felt guilty and humiliated for failing to give her husband an heir again, which only widened the rift between them. Young Lady Diana spent her childhood at Park House, a picturesque royal estate in Sandringham, Norfolk, leased by her parents from Queen Elizabeth II. But the beauty of the place couldn't make up for her emotionally, and often physically, absent parents. Even later, when her younger brother was born and the family finally had an heir, the atmosphere didn't improve. The children were raised by nannies and governesses, and Diana later recalled that she never once heard the words, "I love you," as a child. Her only real bond was with her little brother, whom she did her best to care for.
She was always very caring of little people, and I suppose I was the first little person that she cared for.
Despite being a child herself, Diana was painfully shy from an early age. Relatives remembered how she hated being the center of attention and would blush on stage. She was very timid, even in small groups. It was like she wanted to hide behind someone's skirt, one of her teachers from West Heath School later recalled. Soon, another shock hit the family. When Diana was 7, her parents divorced. When her mother left home with her lover, Diana later said she felt helpless and betrayed. "We didn't have a normal childhood, and really we couldn't have. Our home was a battleground between our parents." Years later, Diana's future husband would reveal how deeply this period affected her. When her mother was packing her things to leave, she promised Diana she'd come back to see her. Diana would wait for her on the doorstep, but she never came. This trauma shaped the rest of Diana's life. She would spend years searching for love and validation wherever she could, in the public eye, in charity work, in her children. After the divorce, Diana, her sisters, and her brother stayed with their father. Her mother moved to Scotland with her new husband. Soon, John remarried to Rane McCorquodale, the Countess of Dartmouth. The children were less than thrilled about their stepmother, and despite Diana's usual shyness, she rejected her outright. They refused to eat at the same table, avoided conversation, and ignored her. Years later, Diana would reconcile with Rane, who would become one of her few supporters after her own divorce. Education wasn't smooth sailing for the future princess either. As a child, she was first homeschooled by her governess, Gertrude Allen, but later attended Sillfield Private School, followed by Riddlesworth Hall, an all-girls boarding school near Thetford, when she was 9. In 1973, she enrolled at West Heath Girls' School in Sevenoaks, Kent, but twice failed her O-levels. Though Diana attended prestigious private schools, including West Heath, she was never top of the class. Her grades were average, but teachers remembered her as an extremely kind, empathetic, and shy girl who always helped others. According to biographers, her academic struggles stemmed not from a lack of intelligence, but from low self-confidence and self-esteem. Academic success simply didn't interest her much. From childhood, she showed talent in music, especially piano, and loved swimming, dancing, and drawing. But her first dream, to become a ballerina, was shattered because she was too tall. "I always knew I was meant to be not in the spotlight, but beside those who were suffering." In 1975, Diana became Lady Diana when her father inherited the title of Earl. Around the same time, the family moved to their ancestral home, Althorpe House, in Northamptonshire. At 16, Di gave up on school for good and went abroad for the first time, to a finishing school, the Institut Alpen Wiedemannet in Switzerland. But success eluded her there too. Classes were in French, and the future princess struggled to keep up. She lasted just one semester before returning to London, where she lived with her mother and friends. After that, Diana abandoned formal education entirely and chose not to attend university, an unusual decision for a woman of her social standing. Instead, she struck out on her own. She completed a crash course in cooking and worked as a chef, then became a nursery assistant, cleaned for her sister Sarah and a few friends, and even worked as a waitress at parties. In 1980, she took a job as a nanny for the Robertsons. Mary Robertson later recalled that Diana was very shy and caring with her son Patrick. She then worked as a teaching assistant at a kindergarten in Pimlico. She cooked, cleaned, and sometimes even hand-washed clothes. It was an unconventional path for the future wife of a crown prince, not exactly the royal way of life. "I loved it. There, I felt needed. Children don't judge you, they just want you to be there," she said in the documentary Diana, in her own words. After her mother gifted her an apartment in Coleherne Court, she moved in and lived there with 3 friends until 1981. She later spoke fondly of that time.
"It was Earl's Court, it was Old Brompton Road. Loved it, so happy there."
Her friends remembered Diana embracing a simple life. She avoided designer clothes, didn't use a chauffeur, and walked to work with a thermos of tea. She avoided rowdy parties, didn't drink or smoke, let alone anything stronger, and she was no heartbreaker either. Unaccustomed to receiving compliments, she'd often blush and shy away, as her friends recalled. Those close to her said Diana struggled with deep insecurities, rooted in feelings of neglect from her parents. So how did she end up marrying the future King of England? And did she really not understand what she was getting into? One of Burke's peerage consultants, who specializes in British aristocratic genealogy, offered an interesting perspective in Time magazine. "No family was more closely linked to the crown than the Spencers. It seemed like a fairy tale. In truth, it was a trap." Diana and Charles first met long before their wedding. She was just 16, her future husband was 30. At the time, romance was out of the question. The prince was seriously involved with Diana's elder sister, Sarah. They reportedly met in November 1977. At Sarah's invitation, Charles visited the Spencers at Althorpe for a pheasant hunt. In their engagement interviews, both shared first impressions. The prince called Diana cheerful, amusing, and attractive, while the royal bride-to-be remembered him as an astonishing man. "I remember her sitting on the sofa, so sweet, so shy. There was something fresh about her, something real," the prince later told biographer Jonathan Dimbleby. Charles and Sarah were often seen together in public as a couple. So what derailed their romance? By Sarah's own admission, she couldn't bring herself to love the queen's son. Plus, he was too slow. But there was another, more mundane reason. In an interview, Sarah once said she didn't care if her husband was a prince or a garbage collector. Love was all that mattered. The comparison offended the royals, and Charles sent her an angry breakup letter. Meanwhile, some believe Diana had been interested in Charles since her youth, possibly from that very first meeting. Unverified reports claim she even decorated her dorm walls with pictures of the prince. But that likely would have been the end of it. Their first encounter hardly foreshadowed a wedding. Charles and Diana didn't see each other for years. Their second meeting took place at Balmoral, where the prince was grieving the death of his beloved uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, a man so close to Charles that many said he was more like a father. It was Louis who had encouraged Charles's affair with the married Camilla Parker Bowles, and who later advised his nephew to find a pure, sweet bride the people would love. At a barbecue hosted by Philip de Pass, where both were guests, a telling moment occurred. One Diana would recount later. She offered Charles condolences about his uncle's death, and he suddenly kissed her. "You need someone by your side," she told him, to which he literally pounced on me and started kissing me, she said. After that, Diana noted, Charles started chasing after her.
Whereupon he leapt upon me, started kissing me and everything. I thought, well, yeah, this is not what people do. And he was all over me for the rest of the evening, followed me around, everything, puppy. And, I was flattered.
This moment became a turning point in their relationship and marked the beginning of their romance, if you could even call it that, which was debatable. From their second meeting at Balmoral until the wedding, they only met 13 times. One of which was at a formal dinner with the prince's family. It was during that dinner that Diana sealed her fate. She charmed the queen so much that Her Majesty later hinted to her son, "She's the one!" Was it love? For Diana, maybe. For Charles, things were more complicated. Just before all this, a scandal had begun brewing around the prince. Unknowingly, Diana had stepped into a world of courtly intrigue and manipulation, one she had no clue about. By the time they met again, the prince had to marry, a 30-year-old heir with a string of romances behind him. Relationships seen not as marriage material, but as experience. One of those experienced lovers was Camilla Parker Bowles, who'd been involved with Charles long before Lady Di came into the picture. While dealing with her husband's infidelities, Camilla had started an affair with Charles, but the prince had genuinely fallen in love and seriously considered spending his life with a woman unworthy of a royal title. Their affair was splashed across every tabloid in the 70s. But Charles's choice didn't sit well with the royal family. Her lineage and reputation weren't up to standard. Back then, Camilla, with her habits and manners, didn't fit the image of a princess, let alone the fact that the future wife of the heir to the throne was expected to be a virgin. Her image didn't fit either. She needed to be modest, noble, and young so the queen mother could mold her into the right public image. Charles was also under time pressure. He had to think about marriage and heirs, and then Diana appeared. She ticked every box on the royal checklist. No one asked if she was happy. It didn't matter, said one of the court's close advisors. She was used to revive the royal family's public image and boost its popularity. From the very beginning, a fairy tale narrative was crafted around their relationship and around the young woman herself, the image of a people's princess. She fit the court's requirements perfectly, from a noble, if impoverished family, with a reputation as a quiet, modest girl. But most importantly, no known romantic history before Prince Charles, meaning she was probably a virgin. The royal court, as biographers later wrote, was in a hurry to secure an asset as valuable as Diana. No one bothered to consider whether a 20-year-old girl could handle the immense pressure that came with being part of the royal family. And Charles hadn't really gotten to know his future wife.
We met 13 times before we got married.
All he knew was that she loved children. The prince hesitated over whether to propose. That's when his father, Prince Philip, stepped in. Though he wasn't thrilled about living in the shadow of his wife, Elizabeth II, he was just as fiercely protective of royal family values. He pressured his son, telling him it was time to do the right thing for his country and family. The Duke of Edinburgh sent Charles a harshly worded letter, urging him to act like a man and stop leading the young woman on. Charles took it as an order. Later in an interview, he'd say with irony that he was genuinely surprised Diana was willing to rely on him. But why did Diana agree to this romance? As she later admitted, she was drawn to Charles's age, status, and the feeling of being needed. One of the future princess's friends, Charles Colthurst, would later say in an interview,
I think she had a dream, and she hoped the dream would come to life.
An older man who was in a prominent position liked me, wanted to have me around.
But there might have been a far more practical reason. Under British law, the Spencer family's estate would go to the male heir, her brother. Diana's sisters married well, but the young woman couldn't count on a secure future without making a good match. A career wasn't really an option either, given her lack of higher education. An interesting detail, Lady Di's favorite books were Barbara Cartland's romance novels. Even before marriage, she devoured The King's Bride, admitting it embodied all her girlish dreams. In 1993, the author herself would say, "Diana only read my books." Say what you will, but that's not the best choice. What do you think? Was there some calculation in Diana's marriage? Share your thoughts in the comments. In the fall of 1980, rumors of their romance first surfaced, thanks to a royal reporter who stumbled upon them. Then, in February 1981, over a candlelit dinner at Buckingham Palace, the prince proposed to Diana. Miss Spencer could hardly refuse, so by that winter, she was already appearing at public events with a stunning sapphire and diamond ring. On February 24th, the engagement of the Prince of Wales and Lady Diana Spencer was officially announced. He asked me, "Will you marry me?" I laughed. I never thought this would happen. Diana recalled in private notes for biographer Andrew Morton, "In the footage of their official engagement announcement, they both looked happy." The wedding was set for July 29th at St. Paul's Cathedral. The whole of Britain was buzzing. It lifted the nation's spirits during a grim economic downturn. The timing of the wedding was perfect. Almost immediately after the engagement, Charles left for a royal tour of Australia and New Zealand. I thought it was strange that he never once called to check on me. Not a single call the whole time he was away. I made excuses for him. He was so busy. I tried to explain and justify so much back then, the princess would later recall. But these were just the first warning signs. That spring, Diana moved into the palace, and her illusions were quickly shattered. Dreaming of a fairy tale life with a loving husband, she was disappointed for the first, but not the last time. The young woman realized Charles didn't have strong feelings for her, but hoped things would change after the engagement. Their brief meetings were always chaperoned. And before the wedding, conversations revolved around one thing: the upcoming grand ceremony. The newlyweds never had a chance to truly know each other. From the very beginning, there was an odd sense of distance. During an interview, Charles said they were both thrilled and happy, but when asked about love, they answered differently.
I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Yes.
Well, it obviously
put your own
means,
interpretation.
obviously means two very happy people.
Yes.
Once again,
As you can see.
congratulations.
Well, from us, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Whatever in love means. Not what you'd hear from someone in love. That answer left a depressing impression on many. It came off as cold and detached compared to Diana's sincerity. Later, Charles tried to justify the remark, saying he meant to highlight the complexity of defining love itself. But the public saw it as proof his feelings weren't genuine. For Diana, that same phrase, as she herself admitted, was the first major crack in her fairy tale illusions. In her memoirs, she wrote that those words left her feeling profoundly lonely even before the wedding. Charles, meanwhile, kept living his life, including in Camilla's arms. He didn't exactly prioritize bonding with his future wife. There were flowers for his mistress when she fell ill. There was the engraved bracelet, G and F for Gladys and Fred, their pet names, which Diana accidentally found while wedding planning. And then there was something far worse. Once, I overheard him on the phone from the bathroom saying, "Whatever happens, I'll always love you." When I casually mentioned I'd heard him through the door, we had a horrible row. Diana was left alone in her lavish quarters. The alienation compounded her childhood wounds, taking a toll on her mental health. She developed bulimia, losing 12 kilograms in 6 months, so much that her wedding dress had to be altered last minute. She felt like an outsider in the palace, its rules stifling, its atmosphere icy and hostile. At my first wedding dress fitting, my waist was 29 inches. By the wedding day, it was 23.5 inches. I just shrank from February to July. The bulimia started a week after their engagement, triggered by Charles resting a hand on her waist and remarking, "Oh, a bit chubby here, aren't we?" Something inside her snapped. Camilla's presence in the prince's life only made it worse. I felt utter despair. The first time it happened, I thought it was just nerves, like a release of tension, Diana later confessed in interviews. The wedding of the century. On July 29, 1981, the most expensive royal ceremony in British history unfolded. Broadcast globally, watched by 750 million, London's streets overflowed with crowds as the procession rolled toward St. Paul's Cathedral. Charles wore his naval commander uniform. Diana's dress, a 9,000-pound creation by designers Elizabeth and David Emanuel, boasted an 8-meter train.
Charles Philip Arthur George, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honor and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto her?
I will.
Diana, wilt thou have this man to thy wedded husband?
I will.
To avoid tripping, she'd practiced at home with bed sheets tied around her waist. The design was kept secret until the last moment, delivered to the palace in a sealed envelope. The final piece glittered with 10,000 pearls, topped by a family heirloom tiara. Walking into St. Paul's, seeing the world's eyes on me, I felt like a lamb to the slaughter, Diana admitted privately. The day had its embarrassments. The taffeta gown wrinkled badly in the horse-drawn carriage, and Diana flubbed Charles's name order during vows, breaking protocol. She also skipped the traditional pledge of obedience to her husband. Palace PR spun it as intentional, forever altering royal wedding vows. Whether accidental or not, it was Lady Di's first rebellion against Anglican norms that demanded wifely submission. Worse, she knew about Charles's ongoing affair with Camilla Parker Bowles, who attended the wedding as a guest. That knowledge poisoned every joyous moment. Paradoxically, these two things would shape Diana's life and tragic end. Diana's joy in her new status was short-lived. Marital troubles began on the honeymoon, split between Broadland's estate and the royal yacht Britannia. It was pure misery. I had so many hopes, and they collapsed within 2 days. She'd say years later. Thoughts of Charles and Camilla drove her mad. Even amid luxury, she felt isolated. Early on, Charles brought his favorite philosophy books, Lawrence van der Post, a passion his young bride didn't share. He'd initially wanted joint reading sessions and lunch discussions, but soon dropped the idea. I spent most of the time crying. He'd read in his cabin, while I was alone on deck. Diana wasn't a reader. She was deeply hurt he preferred books over talking to her, noted biographer Penny Junor. From the start, their interests clashed. Charles loved gardening, architecture, classical music, and alternative medicine. Diana didn't share, or try to, most of his hobbies or social circle. Jonathan Dimbleby, a Charles-friendly biographer, wrote that the prince felt emotionally misunderstood, especially over his spiritual pursuits. She despised his meditation, talking to trees, and spiritual quests, he claimed. Mary Robertson, an American employer Diana worked for as a nanny pre-engagement, recalled being stunned by the girl's limited reading habits. She even advised Diana to read the Times and Daily Telegraph to keep up with Charles. Whether she followed through is unknown, but as his wife, she did try desperately to win his attention. The yacht trip didn't bring them any closer either. Diana thought it would just be the two of them with a small entourage, but reality was different. The yacht was packed with high-profile guests, 21 officers and another 256 people. Formal dinners in tuxedos, important figures at the table, and, while everyone ate, the Royal Navy Band played in the next room. Every evening, the newlyweds were expected to entertain the high-ranking guests, and Diana struggled with it. Husband and wife barely spoke. The prince was absorbed in his books and painting, paying little attention to Diana. This only worsened the princess's mental state and her bulimia. She was throwing up 4 times a day, which took a toll on her and caused mood swings. I remember crying my eyes out during our honeymoon. Everything was wrong, and I was so exhausted by it, Lady Di would later recall. The royal family, used to formalities, simply didn't know, or didn't want to know, how to help her, or what to do with such an emotional, open young woman. Her jealousy and desperation for her husband's attention spiraled into madness. Once, when Charles briefly stepped out, Diana, furious at being ignored, destroyed all his sketches. It was another blow to their already fragile relationship. He had no idea what had happened. Charles was baffled and upset. He didn't understand what had gone wrong or how to fix it, journalist Penny Junor wrote. This incident drove another wedge between them, and the emotional instability only grew. Things got even worse in Balmoral, where the couple went after their honeymoon. Charles preferred long walks and reading to his wife. She, meanwhile, was eaten alive by jealousy. My dreams were nightmares. Every night I saw Camilla. She became my obsession, Diana would say in an interview. I didn't trust Charles. I thought he was calling Camilla every 5 minutes to ask what to do about his marriage. Trying to help, Charles had Lawrence van der Post reach out to me, but he couldn't understand me. I just kept getting worse. The prince didn't solve anything either. He kept reading van der Post or Carl Jung to his young wife, but she didn't understand any of it, and it didn't help. Another blow for Diana was her place in the family hierarchy. For Charles, his mother always came first, then his grandmother, only then his wife. It was never, "Darling, would you like a drink?" It was always, "Mummy, would you like a drink? Granny, would you like one? Diana, what about you?" Fine, no problem, but someone should have warned me that this was normal, because I foolishly assumed the wife came first, she complained. Diana was so depressed she even tried to harm herself. As we'll see later, this wasn't the last tragic episode in her marriage. The prince retreated further into his hobbies, while Diana, after the honeymoon, first put on the mask of, "We're fine." She wore it when facing crowds of subjects, something that didn't come easily to her.
I used to get in the car with Charles, and I used to blab in the car, like crowds everywhere. He said, "No, what's the matter?" I said, "I can't get out of this car." He said, "Why?" I said, "I got this phobia, I can't get out of this car. I don't feel safe." And I was neurotic almost. But then when I got out of the car...
That mask saved her when she found a photo of Camilla in her husband's diary. It saved her again when she saw Charles's cufflinks engraved with his and his mistress's initials. After returning to Britain, the couple moved into Kensington Palace. Charles resumed his visits to Camilla and his laid-back lifestyle. Meanwhile, Princess Diana was expecting their first son in the depths of loneliness. Her children would become the brightest part of Lady Di's story. The pregnancy was announced in the fall of 1982, but even such a life-changing event didn't improve their relationship. Diana was left mostly alone with little attention from her husband. Her main visitors were doctors and servants. Charles only occasionally graced her with his attention. Her insecurity was now mixed with crushing jealousy, a feeling that would stay with her for years. Back then, young and desperate to save her marriage, she was trapped. Everyone around Charles knew about his affair and where he went. Diana, however, no longer knew who was a friend or who to trust. She grew so desperate that once, 3 months pregnant, she threw herself down the stairs to get Charles's attention. In recordings later shared with Andrew Morton, she described the incident happening during a visit to the late Elizabeth II's estate in Norfolk. Charles's response? "I won't listen. You always do this to me. I'm going riding." And she threw herself down, convinced the baby would be unharmed. Prince William was fine, but the Queen, according to the recording, was horrified. Diana later said, "The Queen came out, completely shaken, trembling. She was so scared." But the act didn't provoke the reaction she'd hoped for from her husband. Still, insiders say that as the birth approached, Charles did try to spend more time with his wife. He even, for the first time in British royal history, attended the delivery. It's hard to say if Charles's coldness was constant. Those close to the royals claim that, at least early on, there were signs of affection between them. The prince showed his young wife small gestures of attention.
In the early years of their marriage, I constantly saw the prince patting Diana, encouraging her, whispering in her ear, telling her she was doing a great job, patting her on the bottom and looking at her. And they'd look at each other the way lovers do and laugh and smile at each other, always gazing into each other's eyes. There's no doubt about it. They were a great couple in the beginning.
But their marriage and the princess's emotional state remained unstable. Consumed by jealousy, she pressured her husband, insulted his mistress, and couldn't understand why she lost to Camilla, who was older and less attractive. Charles's inconsistent treatment of Diana continued even after the baby's birth. Diana, meanwhile, was slowly losing her mind. Later, in an interview, she would describe her husband's attitude toward her. "He found a virgin, a sacrificial lamb, and in a way, he was obsessed with me. But it was hot and cold, hot and cold. You never knew what mood he'd be in, up and down, up and down." She felt Charles had thrown her under the bus to appease his mother. After giving birth, by the princess's own admission, she began suffering from a lack of attention again, fell into postpartum depression, and later started harming herself. Diana's openness about her psychological struggles only irritated both Charles and his family. One trip perfectly illustrates their dynamic. 2 years after the wedding, the couple went on a tour of Australia. It was late March, and tensions in the royal family were rising. The Princess of Wales was well aware of her husband's affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. Even little William, who was just 9 months old at the time, couldn't ease the strain. The heat, endless engagements, and non-stop press attention exhausted the young mother. In one photo taken by journalists, Diana is seen breaking down in tears outside the Sydney Opera House, while her husband stood beside her, completely unfazed. As photographers captured Diana sobbing, Charles looked the other way, making no attempt to comfort her. That was typical of him, looking away. It was the first sign that something was wrong, and then we started noticing other things, royal photographer Ken Lennox later recalled. This might have been the moment Diana decided to change the rules of their marriage, with revenge as part of the game. For the rest of the tour, she pretended everything was fine, occasionally needling him. He especially hated her laugh. In public, they still put on a united front, but in private, they turned away from each other, barely speaking. The climax of that tour was a dance the press branded cruel afterward, but this time, it was Charles who retaliated. That evening, on March 28th, a gala concert was held where the royal couple's dance was supposed to be the highlight. Diana wore a dazzling blue dress, while her husband followed almost unnoticed. In the official photos, neither of them even pretended to smile. But once they hit the dance floor, the prince seemed determined to punish his wife. There was no other explanation for the way he spun her so sharply and aggressively. Diana, still forcing a smile, struggled to keep up. Most likely, he was furious at the attention his wife received. Charles grumbled to his aide that the press was obsessed with Diana, barely mentioning him. This became one of the biggest rifts in their marriage. Diana's popularity was skyrocketing at an unbelievable pace. Her beauty, grace, and the very image the royal family had crafted for her worked wonders for her reputation. She wasn't just famous, she was a global superstar. And later we'll see what she did to keep that fame alive. But even in the early years, Diana played games with the press. On December 23, 1985, she gave Charles an unusual gift. She danced with ballet star Wayne Sleep in a surprisingly bold performance for someone of her status. It was a secretly rehearsed surprise for Prince Charles at a Royal Ballet charity event. She had prepared for weeks, telling no one. It was a daring move. The audience, including Charles, was stunned. But according to some accounts, the prince didn't appreciate the joke because, once again, all eyes were on Diana. And of course, the press only wrote about her. A similar moment happened later that year at a White House reception, where she danced rock and roll with John Travolta, an impromptu moment that sent journalists and onlookers into a frenzy. Once again, Diana outshone her husband and even the Reagans, their hosts. For Charles's pride, it was a crushing blow. Diana later admitted that her husband was deeply proud, yet craved public approval. It infuriated him that people adored Diana so much. At every event, they rushed to greet her first, shaking Charles's hand only afterward. If you're as proud as my husband, hearing this every day for 4 weeks would eat at you. You'd get upset instead of being happy and sharing it with others. At first, she felt guilty, as if it was unfair to him. But later, she learned to use it to her advantage. Yet it wasn't just the attention that angered Charles. She filled the void with shopping and luxury. During that same Australia trip, she packed around 200 dresses and piles of jewelry. That blue dress she wore while dancing with Charles? She paired it with King Faisal's necklace, a 4-strand diamond piece weighing 84 carats, made by Harry Winston in 1952 and bought by the King of Saudi Arabia as a gift to Elizabeth II in 1967. The Queen only allowed Diana to wear it once, and so they lived, each playing their part in public, each fulfilling their duty. Was there ever real love between them? We may never know. If the creators of Diana, the interview that shocked the world, ITV's documentary marking the 25th anniversary of her Martin Bashir interview, are to be believed, there wasn't. The film features Diana's astrologer, Penny Thornton, claiming that Charles told his bride-to-be he didn't love her right before the wedding. I think he didn't want to lie to her. He wanted no secrets between them from the start, and it absolutely destroyed her. At least that's what Diana told her, but others saw it differently. The Queen's former press secretary, Dickie Arbiter, told True Royalty TV that in the early days of their marriage, the couple couldn't keep their hands off each other. I was with them on their first official tour in 1981. She was the first Princess of Wales in over 80 years, so the excitement around her was huge. Charles was always touching her, and at one point, he even gave her a little squeeze. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. Diana's psychological struggles didn't end there. When Prince William was 4, she collapsed during a trip to Canada. Witnesses said she told her husband she was about to disappear before passing out, likely due to bulimia and stress. Did the royal family even want to help her? By then, her eating disorder was consuming her, and those close to her noticed Diana fading away. It was her way of dealing with the overwhelming stress crushing her.
Everybody knew about the bulimia in the family, and they all blamed the failure of the marriage on the bulimia. And that's taken some time to get the thing differently.
After that, Di was haunted by illness and a constant feeling of inadequacy, like she couldn't handle anything and was good for nothing, useless, hopeless, failing on all fronts. Yet there was something important and positive in her life with Charles. One of the few bright spots in Lady Di's life was her children. A year after the wedding, Diana, Princess of Wales, gave her husband an heir. And here, Lady Di became a trailblazer. While all future monarchs before had been born at home, William was born at St. Mary's Hospital. Even in this moment, she had to bend to her husband's demands. Labor was induced on a day that fit Charles's schedule so he wouldn't miss a polo match. 2 years later, the couple's second son, Prince Harry, was born in the same hospital. Rumors swirled that Charles was disappointed the second child wasn't a girl. Diana, defying norms, chose what made her feel most at ease. In fact, for the first time in documented British royal history, a prince was present at his wife's delivery. I didn't want to be alone. I wanted Charles there. I wanted it to feel human, not royal, she later recalled. The Princess of Wales also picked the names for her sons. Charles reportedly wanted Arthur and Albert, but Lady Di found those too old-fashioned and insisted on her choices. For Diana, motherhood wasn't just a duty, raising heirs as part of the job. It was the most important part of her life. I live for my boys. I'd be lost without them, she'd say in an interview. Her children became her anchor. For a while after the wedding, she kept up the picture-perfect image the public expected.
I feel my role is supporting my husband, and whenever I can, always being behind him, encouraging, and also, most important thing, being a mother and a wife.
But early on, Diana made sure her kids had as normal an upbringing as possible, staying deeply involved in their care. Traditionally, royal heirs were handed off to nannies and governesses, but Lady Di broke that rule. She enrolled them in school and drove them there herself, canceled engagements for them, took them to charity events, sometimes against the family's wishes. Notably, William was the first royal child to go through the full state school system, from nursery to college, ditching the tradition of private tutors. Diana did everything she could to give her sons the most normal childhood possible. Her former press secretary, Patrick Jeffson, said she made sure they stayed grounded, riding public transport, playing in muddy jeans, hitting water slides, queuing for fast food, and watching TV at night. From an early age, she shielded them from royal protocol. She made sure that they experienced things like going to the cinema, queuing up to buy a McDonald's, going to amusement parks, those sorts of things that they could share with their friends, he said. The princess always made time for her boys' sports events and school life. Later, her sons would follow her lead, sending their own kids to state schools. Diana, by her children's accounts, loved to have fun. And why not? She was only 21 and 23 when they were born. Our mum was a total kid at heart. Whenever someone asks me to describe her personality, the first thing I hear in my head is her laugh, this wild, full of joy laughter. He'd also recall, one of her mottos was, "You can misbehave, just don't get caught." She was the naughty parent, showing up to our football matches and stuffing sweets in our socks. We'd walk off the pitch with pockets full of candy. Maybe she felt her children were the only real unconditional love she'd ever known, and she threw herself into it completely. Her love was so strong you could feel it even if she was standing across the room, the prince added. She was spontaneous. She loved to laugh and have fun. She knew real life was happening outside palace walls, and she wanted us to see it. Once, William came home from school to find Diana had invited supermodels Cindy Crawford, Christy Turlington, and Naomi Campbell to Kensington Palace. "I was 12 or 13 and I had their posters on my wall," he admitted. "I turned bright red, didn't know what to say, and nearly tripped up the stairs. I was completely starstruck."
She had a very cheeky sense of humor. She loved the rudest cards you could imagine.
Years later, William and Harry would say they always felt deeply loved, a feeling that lingered even decades after her death. Diana's informality wasn't just about parenting. Her fashion choices defied royal dress codes. She often wore haute couture, bold for the time. Her favorite, Versace, one of the most provocative brands of the 90s, the Balenciaga of its day. Gianni Versace's designs were all about freedom and boldness. Instead of conservative labels, Lady Di rocked off-the-shoulder dresses, backless gowns, extreme minis, and plunging necklines, shattering every written and unwritten rule. Iconic examples? The now iconic revenge dress and the black sheep sweater. The latter was packed with symbolism, a metaphor for rebellious Diana carving her own path. It's been fascinating to look at some of the risks Diana took with fashion, says Larry Lynn, curator of a recent exhibition on the princess's style. She learned the unwritten rules of royal dressing and liked to break them, even with small daring touches. She was the first royal woman to wear trousers to an evening event. She loved tuxedo-style outfits and wore a lot of black, a color usually reserved for mourning. But it wasn't just clothes. Unlike the restrained gestures the royals still favor, just look at Duchess Kate's posture. Lady Di wasn't afraid to be herself outside the palace. She showed emotion freely, hugged her sons in public, and valued physical touch. She wasn't willing to sacrifice comfort for protocol's sake, like the forbidden crossed legs pose. At first, she followed the rule, but eventually, she sat however she liked. But perhaps the most famous way she defined herself was through charity. Many royals engage in philanthropy, but Diana went further than anyone. After having children and feeling lost within the castle walls, Diana increasingly sought solace in the outside world. Some saw her actions as a search for the love she longed to give, but never received herself. "I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, but I don't see myself being queen of this country," she said in that now iconic interview. And she succeeded. The princess worked tirelessly to bring public attention to the critical and sensitive issue of HIV/AIDS. Becoming the first high-profile figure of her stature who wasn't afraid to hold the hand of an AIDS patient in front of the cameras. This happened in 1987 at Middlesex Hospital. Remember, this was the 80s. The topic was poorly understood and deeply taboo. That simple gesture shattered a global stigma. The image of her hand clasped with a patient spread across the world. She didn't just visit, she sat beside them, listened, and held their hands. Years later, Lady Di organized an auction in support of cancer and HIV charities, selling off a collection of 79 of her most iconic dresses and raising over £3.4 million. It was the first time in history a royal didn't just lend their name to a cause, but took full initiative, essentially asking for donations outright. Beyond that, she backed charities helping children with cancer, homeless teens, victims of domestic abuse, war veterans, and people with mental health struggles. You should do good deeds simply because, no thanks needed, no payback expected. But maybe one day, someone will do something kind for you in return. Nothing brings me greater happiness than trying to help the most vulnerable people in society. It's my purpose, a huge part of my life, almost like fate. Thanks to her efforts, hundreds of charities were established worldwide, and in the 90s, she even took a stand against landmines. In January 1997, Diana traveled to Angola as part of a campaign with the HALO Trust. She put on a bulletproof vest and walked through an active minefield to send a message. This isn't some distant war. This is people's reality today. She visited mine-affected areas and met victims, including children who had lost limbs. Her actions drew global attention to the humanitarian crisis caused by landmines. In a letter to the British Red Cross after her trip, she wrote, "If my visit has helped even a little to shine a light on this horrific issue, then my deepest wish has been fulfilled." Critics called her naive, accused her of populism, but just months after her death, the Mine Ban Treaty was signed. Her impact was real. People called Diana the People's Princess. Some claimed everything she did was revenge on Charles, that the princess was just stealing the spotlight to spite her disgraced husband. Was that really the case? We'll probably never know, but I doubt any of us would walk through a minefield for revenge, right? I was a problem. I was a liability. I was never part of the game. Reading about Princess Diana, you'll find polarizing takes, from innocent lamb to master manipulator. Her words and actions have been reinterpreted so many times that forming a clear image of her is nearly impossible. Partly because Diana herself didn't leave behind many personal accounts, and many insider recollections only surfaced months or years after her death, leaving no way for her to refute them. So the narrative split. There were two Dianas, one a victim of circumstance and a philanthropist. But what about the other? The answer starts with her marriage to Charles. The prince openly cheated on Lady Di with Camilla, and some say not just her. By 1985, the first official reports of trouble in their marriage surfaced, though Charles insisted in every interview that he was devoted to his wife.
When you took on the vow of marriage?
Yes, absolutely.
And you were?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down.
By the 1990s, the marriage had completely fallen apart, surviving only on paper. The princess suspected her husband wasn't just having an affair with Camilla, but also with their son's nanny. Tiggy Legbork wasn't the first nanny for William and Harry. Diana had cycled through several, always fearing her husband's infidelity, but Tiggy was different. Hired in 1993, a year after their official separation, she became a major presence in the boys' lives. Her role was to fill the maternal void, and judging by how close they grew to her, she did it well. Too well, in fact. Years later, Diana would tell her lawyer she suspected an affair between Charles and Tiggy. One witness claimed that in 1995, Diana tried to convince him that neither she nor Camilla truly mattered to Charles. Both women were just smokescreens to hide his relationship with his son's nanny. And while early on, Charles would ask staff to lie to Diana about his whereabouts, he eventually stopped hiding it. From day one in her new role, Tiggy kept notes frequently accusing Diana of neglecting the kids. One line even made it to the press. "I give them the children what they need at this stage: fresh air, shooting, and horses. Diana gives them tennis rackets and buys them popcorn at the movies." Diana decided to repay her husband in kind and began an affair with Major James Hewitt. Their relationship was detailed in Andrew Morton's Diana, Her True Story, released in May 1992. The book, which also revealed the troubled princess's self-destructive tendencies, caused a media firestorm. The affair lasted nearly 5 years before rumors went public, but he wasn't her first or only lover. She was also linked to her bodyguard, Barry Manicky. In an affair that started in 1985 and lasted about a year, the Princess of Wales saw Barry less as a lover and more as a shoulder to cry on, someone who offered comfort and protection. In the infamous Squidgygate tapes, Diana spoke of her deep bond with Manicky. "When I was 24 or 25, I fell in love with someone who worked in this environment, and he was the greatest friend I ever had. I was ready to give up everything to be with him." Can you believe that? When Charles found out about the affair, he had Manicky reassigned to diplomatic security. A year later, Barry died suddenly in a motorcycle crash. The bike he was riding with a friend collided with a truck. The driver claimed he'd been blinded by the headlights of a third, unidentified vehicle that was never found. For the rest of her life, Diana tried to uncover the truth about the accident. She was convinced her husband's security team had orchestrated it.
And it was all found out, and he was chucked out, and then he was killed. And that was the biggest blow of my life, I must say.
Next came the love affair with Hewitt. She'd met him even before her wedding to Charles at a polo match in Tidworth. While the princess didn't pay him much attention at first, Hewitt later admitted he'd been watching her. The two occasionally crossed paths at parties and sporting events, and after Diana broke things off with monarchy, Hewitt stepped into the picture. Their relationship began in 1866 with Diana asking him to coach her in horseback riding, and with a few on and off breaks, lasted several years. Malicious rumors claim James was actually Harry's father, but there's no proof. Hewitt repeatedly denied the rumors. "It's not true, and it hurts everyone, especially Harry," Hewitt said in a 2017 interview with Channel 7. Later, he'd go on to write not one but 2 books about their affair, Princess in Love and Love and War, and even tried to sell her letters to him for a hefty sum, £10 million. Soon, it became impossible for the royal couple to keep their extramarital affairs under wraps. The press kept digging up details of their personal lives. In 1992, evidence of Charles's infidelity leaked, intimate phone calls with his mistress. Around the same time, a private conversation between the princess and James Gilby, heir to a gin fortune and Diana's childhood friend, also surfaced. The call, which took place in 1989, featured Lady Di venting about her husband without mincing her words. While Gilby comforted her, confessed his love, and called her darling and squidgy, the scandal, dubbed Squidgygate, a nod to Watergate, blew up. The call had been recorded without their knowledge and was published in The Sun in 1992, sparking outrage and damaging Diana's reputation. On December 9, 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced the couple's amicable separation in the House of Commons. But in an even more explosive 1995 interview, Diana would deny the affair, though her biographers maintain that Gilby was a man who truly loved her. The press often framed Diana's infidelities as revenge on her unfaithful husband, while Camilla became the ultimate scapegoat. She was labeled the royal marriage wrecker, relentlessly hounded by paparazzi. Still, royal biographers can't agree on who cheated first, Charles or Diana. There's also evidence of Diana's flings with millionaire Oliver Hoare, John F. Kennedy Jr., and former England rugby captain Will Carling. Charles himself introduced Diana to Oliver Hoare, a close friend, though Hoare was married, so nothing happened at first. The millionaire also didn't want to ruin his friendship. He only reciprocated Diana's feelings after she and Charles separated in 1992, but the affair was short-lived. Proof of their closeness? A bizarre fire alarm Hoare set off in her quarters. The alarms went off when he lit a cigarette, and firefighters found him hiding behind a potted palm in Diana's bedroom, in his underwear, cigarette in hand. Diana's jealousy ruined it all. She called Hoare day and night, exposing their affair to his wife. According to her ex-bodyguard Ken Worf, she was deeply in love with Hoare, but Hoare wasn't willing to leave his family for her. In 1994, he tried to end things, but Diana couldn't let go and bombarded him with calls. Police records showed nearly 300 calls made from Kensington Palace and nearby phone booths. The royal family hadn't taken such a PR hit since Edward VIII's abdication. Prince Philip was furious. "I must remind you that membership in the royal family isn't a popularity contest. It's a joint effort to uphold the institution," he wrote to Diana. In her infamous 1995 BBC Panorama interview, Diana admitted calling Hoare a few times but denied being obsessive. She also claimed their relationship wasn't romantic, calling him just a friend. Her fling with John F. Kennedy Jr., son of U.S. President John F. Kennedy, was brief. They only met a handful of times, but intense. Princess's friend Simone Simmons would later describe it in her book, Diana, The Last Word. Diana and JFK Jr. allegedly met at a New York hotel where his father once rendezvoused with Marilyn Monroe. Simmons claimed Diana rated him a perfect 10 and said she felt like America's first lady in his arms. Rugby star Will Carling wasn't as lucky. He caught Diana's eye while coaching her sons and was reportedly invited for tea in her private quarters. Their secret meetings continued, though Carling was married. When the press found out, it wrecked his life. After Diana publicly suggested he leave his wife because he was unhappy, his marriage collapsed. Carling denied the affair, calling Diana just a friend, but no one bought it. He lost both his wife and his lover. Public outrage grew. On June 29, 1994, Prince Charles gave a televised interview with Jonathan Dimbleby, admitting his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. He said the relationship rekindled in 1986 when his marriage to Diana was irretrievably broken. That same night, Diana made headlines with her revenge dress. The The Christina Stambolian gown had gathered dust in her closet for 3 years. She deemed it too risky. But at the last minute, she swapped her planned Valentino dress for the iconic black off-the-shoulder number with an asymmetrical hem and flowing chiffon train. Her gamble paid off. The look went down in history and kept everyone talking, but storm clouds were gathering over Diana. Her reputation kept crumbling due to the affairs. Charles likely poured oil on the fire too. The Prince and Princess of Wales used friends to leak stories, each blaming the other for the marriage's collapse. Yet Diana hesitated to divorce, terrified her boys would be taken from her.
Her boys would be taken away from her. She said they're going to do that, They're going to try and take my boys away from me.
So she decided to rehabilitate her image and tell her truth to the world. That's how the ill-fated, scandalous interview was born. Diana's brother, Earl Charles Spencer, and Prince William later accused journalist Martin Bashir of being one of her potential killers. His actions, they claimed, set off the chain reaction leading to tragedy. Bashir manipulated Diana, exploiting her distrust of the crown and fear of betrayal by presenting fake evidence of royal conspiracies. Using forged financial documents, he convinced her that people around her were paid off to spy on her. The result? A bombshell interview that shocked the public and forced Diana to break ties with the palace. In 2021, an independent inquiry led by Lord Dyson confirmed Bashir used fake bank statements and lies to secure Diana's 1995 Panorama interview. Initially unable to reach Diana directly, Bashir went through her brother, Charles Spencer. To win him over, Bashir hired a BBC graphic designer to forge bank records, falsely showing payments from News International to Spencer's ex-bodyguard. Playing on Spencer's suspicion that his guard was selling family secrets, Bashir got his foot in the door, and soon he was negotiating the interview with Diana. Investigators believe Bashir fed Diana's paranoia, telling her she was being watched and marked for death. Dyson concluded the journalist exploited her fearful state to make himself indispensable, and he succeeded. Princess Diana's interview for BBC Panorama, aired on November 20th, 1995, became the most famous, explosive, and painful media moment in the history of the British monarchy. Over 22 million viewers in the UK alone tuned in, and it became the point of no return. Her marriage to Prince Charles was beyond saving. During the interview, Diana admitted to feeling miserable and under immense pressure. For the first time on national television, she acknowledged her husband's long-standing affair with Camilla. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. That line about Charles and Camilla became legendary, a powerful and devastating blow to the royal family's public image. Diana also spoke about her health struggles and the cold indifference she faced from the royals. It was a cry for help, but no one listened, she said. The combination of illnesses she described, bulimia, depression, led some biographers to speculate she had borderline personality disorder.
Friends on my husband's side were indicating that I was, again, unstable, sick, and should be put in a home of some sort in order to get better. I was almost an embarrassment.
Journalist Martin Bashir asked direct, provocative questions, pressing exactly where it hurt. "Did you become a problem for them?" he asked, referring to the royal family. Diana agreed. "Yes, I believe so," she replied. At one point, Bashir, hinting at the royals' perspective, wondered, couldn't they have just quietly sidelined her instead of launching a full campaign against her? Diana's response was sharp. "That's the whole point. I won't go quietly. I'll fight to the end because I have responsibilities." She outright called her husband's inner circle the enemy. Of course she'd say that. According to those close to her, Bashir spent weeks feeding her fears. He claimed to have insider knowledge about a coordinated smear campaign against her, involving journalists, courtiers, intelligence agencies, and even her own friends. This played right into Diana's long-held suspicions that Charles's camp at St. James's Palace was plotting against her. By 1995, she was convinced she had powerful enemies and was deeply vulnerable. "I think she was just looking for confirmation," her brother, Charles Spencer, later said. Her fears grew stronger. Friends who saw her just before the November 5th interview noticed a shift. Diana's close friend Rosa Monckton wrote that everyone sensed something was off, but none of us had any idea what it was. Years later, William would say that interview fueled the fear, paranoia, and isolation he remembers in his mother's final years. He also blamed it for worsening his parents' relationship and causing wider damage. "The deceitful way the interview was obtained influenced what my mother said," William noted. For the crown, the fallout was brutal. No one in its history had ever been so openly critical of the monarchy, let alone in such an unflattering light. Under Elizabeth's reign, journalists only got the information the palace wanted them to have. The royal family lived by the rule, never complain, never explain. Naturally, the queen was furious. Even Princess Margaret, who'd been close to her, cut ties. She never publicly commented on the interview, but after Diana's revelations aired, their relationship crumbled. Margaret viewed it as betrayal. Biographer Craig Brown wrote, "She hated bad behavior in others. To share private feelings with the world without warning was seen as outrageous betrayal. Even if what Diana said was true, Margaret was merciless." But it's also possible Margaret sensed Diana's confession wasn't just a desperate wife's outcry. It may have been part of a calculated move. Years later, an investigation would reveal that Diana's body language during the interview suggested rehearsed answers and pre-planned questions. Body language expert Judy James noted,
"So in control of herself, so in control of her emotions, and also so in control of the entire interview."
Additionally, experts believe her makeup was deliberately understated to craft an image of vulnerability and innocence. Sir Richard Eyre expanded on this.
Come back 10 minutes later, having restored their makeup. I think that's a conscious decision.
This could very well have been her way of retaliating against Charles, praising him just enough to avoid pettiness, while delivering a final blow after years of humiliation, a defiant emotional protest. Post-interview, Charles's reputation tanked. The public saw him as the man who betrayed Britain's most beloved woman. The backlash was fierce, and some within the monarchy viewed it as a deliberate attack. Camilla was deeply wounded too. She reportedly sent Charles furious letters afterward, dismissing Diana as mentally unstable. According to Parker Bowles, Diana had no right to complain about infidelity. She'd had affairs of her own, which Diana also admitted in the interview. In one letter, Camilla allegedly urged Charles to stand up to that ridiculous creature's onslaught. Interestingly, this wasn't Diana's first public confession. Though less talked about, she'd been recording personal interviews since 1992 with writer Peter Settlin. In those tapes, she spoke about her childhood, her crumbling marriage, Charles's affairs, her bulimia, and her loneliness. Essentially, the same truth she'd later share on Panorama. Some clips available online show a very different Diana.
If you come in here, you sit down and be quiet.
You've got to be very quiet.
Very quiet. Don't touch it, William, because it's all focused on me.
The 1995 interview hammered the final nail into the coffin of her marriage. The Queen demanded a divorce. It also caused a rift with William and Harry, then just 13 and 11. That, more than anything, haunted Diana. Her close friend Simone Simmons later revealed the princess regretted the interview. It led to her first major fight with William. William was absolutely livid, Simone said. Diana had only told him about the top-secret interview after it was recorded. Of course, it was all over the papers, and people at school were calling her all sorts of names. William told me he was teased because of it. He felt awful for his mum, but he was furious with her. That weekend at Kensington Palace, they had a huge row. William was angry. Diana was devastated. When I saw her the next day, she was a wreck. The point of no return had come. In 1996, the couple divorced officially. But was Diana ever truly free? Others partly answered that. Richard Kay, editor-at-large, explained on the Daily Mail's Palace Confidential podcast, "You've got to remember, Diana was a radical. She was deeply unhappy, trapped within the royal system. She tried to break away, but never fully could before her death." Diana lost most of her titles and privileges. First and foremost, she was stripped of her Royal Highness title, becoming simply Diana, Princess of Wales. From that moment on, Lady Di had to pay for her own security and cover all her travel expenses. The woman received around $23 million, along with an annual allowance of £600,000. The princess decided to leave all the money to her sons as their inheritance. She was also allowed to continue living at Kensington Palace, keep most of her jewelry, and travel on the royal plane. However, she would have had to give up these privileges, including the apartment in the palace, if she had remarried. But that was something Diana wasn't afraid of. Because of the divorce, Lady Di had to step back from many of the charities she had previously worked with. Partly, this was due to her no longer being part of the royal institution. Most of the organizations she'd been involved with before the divorce were under the monarchy's influence. Without her official status, she could no longer represent the crown at events, open hospitals and schools, present awards, and so on. And the royal family itself did everything to distance itself from Diana after all the scandals. Her continued active involvement could have been seen as uncoordinated competition with the official members of the family. Because patronage wasn't just a formality, it was a duty reserved for monarchy representatives. There were even instances where the crown actively hindered its former daughter-in-law's efforts. Her visits were abruptly canceled. Letters never reached their recipients. Everything that had once been effortless now became a struggle. I was the wife of the Prince of Wales, the one he left. I was the problem, the stumbling block. Nothing like this had ever happened before. What do we do with her? That's what they were thinking. Still, Diana held on to the areas where she could keep helping people. Halo Trust, Landmines, National AIDS Trust, London Lighthouse, support for HIV/AIDS patients, and palliative care hospice movement. As the princess herself believed, fewer causes, but more of her personal presence. In essence, Diana turned charity into her personal mission. The mother of the future heir was also no longer invited to family celebrations like Christmas at Sandringham, but there was an even more painful condition than losing her office at St. James's Palace or her royal privileges. Her sons couldn't live with her. They were considered property of the crown. By 1996, Prince William was no longer at home. He was studying at boarding school and could only visit his parents on weekends and holidays. That time was strictly divided between Charles and Diana. Her meetings with the boys became rarer, her jealousy of their nanny grew stronger, and their shared memories dwindled, so she made every moment count. Diana regularly picked her sons up from school herself or organized trips for them, like visits to the National Museum in London or tours of the Tower of London, so they could see their country's history from a different angle. She also took them on vacations, sometimes against their father's plans, which of course infuriated him. From her travels, she always brought them souvenirs and wrote them letters to stay connected. But even the happiest outings couldn't keep the mother-son bond as strong as it once was. The boys were growing up, and their parents no longer played the same role in their lives as they had years before. And so, finally independent, the woman tried to build her own happiness. By then, she had long since broken up with Hewitt, suspecting him of hypocrisy and self-interest, but she still hoped someone would love her, not for her title or status, but just as a woman. Her first serious relationship after the divorce was with heart surgeon Hasnat Khan. The two met during her visit to London's Royal Brompton Hospital in September 1995. Diana, who was used to charming men effortlessly, didn't make much of an impression on the doctor at first. But he, on the other hand, captured her heart. Later, she told energy healer Simone Simmons, "I think I've met my Mr. Wonderful." Their first date wasn't exactly princess-worthy. Khan invited her to drive to his family's house to pick up some books. Years later, he would say, "I never for a second thought she'd say yes, but I asked if she wanted to come along. I was stunned when she agreed. After that, our friendship turned into something more." Their romance stayed out of the public eye for a whole year. It later emerged that Diana happily visited her lover's one-bedroom apartment in Chelsea, where she vacuumed and ironed his shirts. She even met his parents and covered her head out of respect for their religion. Surprisingly, the princess was thrilled by the simplicity of it all. Hasnat later recalled how excited she was to order her own drinks at a pub, something she'd never done before. But Khan wasn't in a rush to propose. As Diana's biographer Tina Brown wrote, the couple discussed marriage, but Hasnat didn't want to become a media target. And who could blame him? After the divorce, the press had turned Diana's private life into a hunting ground. Plus, his family expected him to marry a Pakistani woman of equal status. Diana's attempts to win over his family failed. She even traveled to his homeland, Pakistan, where she befriended Jemima Khan, wife of cricketer Imran Khan. Diana was madly in love with Hasnat Khan and wanted to marry him, even if it meant living in Pakistan, Jemima said. "That's part of why we became friends. She visited me twice to help raise funds for Imran's hospital, but both times she secretly met with Hasnat's family to discuss marriage. She asked me how hard it was to adjust to life in Pakistan and wanted advice on dealing with Pakistani men and their cultural baggage. She dressed the part and tried to learn about her lover's culture and faith. But his family remained unimpressed. When the relationship went public, Hasnat's father declared that his son would not marry the princess. They were looking for another bride. Hasnat himself began pulling away, avoiding meetings and especially public appearances. Lady Di was crushed. She was often seen in tears, so she made one last attempt to make him jealous. She accepted an invitation from Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed to vacation on his yacht. The influential businessman, who owned prime London real estate, wanted to get to know the famous princess better. And that's where she met her final love, Mohammed's son, film producer Dodi Al Fayed. At first, Diana saw the relationship as a way to provoke Hasnat, but over time, she genuinely fell for Dodi. Crew members on Mohammed's yacht later shared how Diana took the wheel herself, joked with Dodi, and enjoyed simple pleasures: swimming, music, dinners on deck. The couple was photographed constantly by paparazzi, and Diana looked happier and more relaxed than she had in years. On August 21st, they set off on a private cruise aboard his family's $32 million yacht, John Akal. exploring secluded spots along the Riviera before ending up in Costa Smeralda, where Diana shone so brightly she lit up the room, as one hotel guest put it. Yet her close friends insisted her feelings for Dodi weren't deep. She was still heartbroken over Hasnat Khan. Unfortunately, their fling only lasted a few weeks, yet it became one of the most talked about in her life. Who knows how Diana's fate might have unfolded, whether she would have finally found her happiness, if not for one August night. She called from Paris. I don't remember what I said then, but I do remember regretting for the rest of my life how little we spoke. If I'd known it was our last conversation, I would have said something special. William's recollection of his final conversation with his mother. At the time, like always, they didn't think much of it and went about their business. He and his brother were having a great time with their cousins in Scotland. As a kid, I never liked talking to my parents on the phone. And with her, at some point, we always spoke over the phone, never in person, just because that's how things were. That day, we talked for maybe 5 minutes at most, the princess's eldest son would later recall. That evening, August 31st, 1997, Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed were relaxing at his father's hotel, the Ritz. The day before, the couple had returned from a vacation on the French Riviera and checked into a $2,000 a night luxury suite. The princess may have been considering a drastic change in her life. Richard Kay from the Daily Mail, who spoke with Diana on the phone that night, remembered her being happier than ever before. For the first time in years, everything in her world was right. An upbeat Diana told Kay she hoped to step back from charity work to focus on her personal life. Just 5 days earlier, she had hinted in an interview with Le Monde that she was contemplating a bold move, calling the British press cruel. She said she would have left the country long ago if not for her sons. "It's different abroad," she said. "People treat me with kindness there." That night, August 31st, they dined at the hotel before heading to Dodi's apartment on Rue Arsène to avoid the paparazzi. According to hotel staff, over dinner, they looked like two love-struck teenagers. But outside, about 30 paparazzi were lying in wait, hungry for a scoop. So the couple tried to slip away unnoticed. Behind the wheel of the Mercedes-Benz S280 was the hotel's deputy head of security, Henri Paul. Their bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, was also with them. On the mile-long stretch leading to the tunnel near the Alma Bridge, the driver sped up to shake off the paparazzi, but couldn't lose a single one. At least 7 photographers on 5 motorcycles and scooters were in pursuit. Around 12:23 a.m., the car entered the tunnel under the Alma Bridge at high speed and crashed into the 13th pillar. Dodi and Henry Paul died instantly. Diana was critically injured but still alive. The paparazzi descended within seconds of the crash. One photographer called his agency on a mobile phone. "It's a disaster," he said. "She didn't make it." Witnesses said she could still whisper phrases like, "Oh my God," and "let me be," responding to doctors with blinks. At the hospital, they tried to resuscitate her, but the severe impact had caused irreversible damage. Her heart stopped, and during surgery, doctors discovered a torn pulmonary vein and massive internal bleeding in her chest. She was taken to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, but her injuries were too severe. Lady Di passed away at 4 a.m. The bodyguard survived but suffered severe head trauma, leaving him with no memory of the crash. Later, photos from the scene of Diana's death spread across international media. Her death shocked the world and sparked countless questions and theories. "It's a disaster. She was murdered," one journalist at the scene told his publication. But did he have a reason to say that? Diana's death was shrouded in speculation. Conspiracy theories included traces of alcohol were found in the driver's blood, far exceeding the legal limit. High speed was also blamed as the car raced into the tunnel trying to escape the relentless paparazzi. And it was the paparazzi who became the first witnesses to the tragedy. One was even accused of failing to help the victims. Instead, he stood there taking photos of the dying. These circumstances divided opinions. French authorities blamed the driver, while the public pointed fingers at the paparazzi whose pursuit may have forced him to speed up. It didn't exactly score them any points when reports emerged that they had photographed the dying princess in the wreckage for profit. According to the New York Times, 9 reporters and 1 motorcyclist faced manslaughter charges, but all were acquitted. In 1999, French prosecutors concluded there wasn't enough evidence to hold them accountable, and all charges were dropped. Still, 3 photographers, Jacques Langevin, Christian Martinez, and Fabrice Chasserie, were charged with violating privacy for photographing Diana and Dodi in the car post-crash. In 2003, they were acquitted after the court ruled that a car on a public road wasn't a private space. But in 2005, France's Court of Cassation overturned the ruling, sending the case back for retrial. In 2006, the Paris Court of Appeals found the photographers guilty of privacy violation and handed them a token fine of just €1 each. Yet other theories persisted, fueled in part by Diana's own fears about threats from the monarchy. After her divorce, she reportedly sent a letter to her butler with eerie premonitions. This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. X is planning an accident, brake failure, serious head injury to clear the way for Charles to remarry. Could Diana, as an ex-wife, really have been an obstacle to Charles's happiness? Unlikely. After her death, he delayed plans to introduce Camilla as his new partner, keeping their relationship out of the public eye for some time. Many conspiracy theorists claim Diana was assassinated by British intelligence. Mohammed Al-Fayed insisted on this version, alleging Diana was pregnant with his son's child, a scenario the royal family couldn't tolerate. It was murder. It was a conspiracy. She was killed by those who didn't want to see her happy outside the establishment, Mohammed Al-Fayed in a BBC interview. But an autopsy found no evidence of pregnancy. Interestingly, in 2006, it was confirmed that MI6 did have a file on Diana. And at the time, the media confidently reported that British intelligence had been actively monitoring the princess. There were also theories that Henry Paul, head of security at the Ritz Hotel, had ties to French and British intelligence, and that he orchestrated the crash, with his being drunk being nothing more than a cover for the press. Nobody saw him drunk before the accident, and some claim his body at the crash site was swapped with another man's. By the way, Henri's bank accounts held far more money than police expected. While his salary was £20,000 a year, his 15 accounts, by the way, held £170,000. He also had a significant amount of cash on him the day of the crash. In 2017, British security expert Alan McGregor, speaking on the anniversary of Diana's death, argued that her passing was no tragic accident. He pointed to glaring security lapses, like the fact that she wasn't driven by a security detail that day, but by a driver provided by the hotel, a clear breach of protocol. A few other odd details stood out. Traces of white paint from another car were found on Diana's wreck. A vehicle never found, fueling theories it was involved in the crash. Some speculated it was used to create a situation that led to the crash. Additionally, witnesses reported a bright flash of light just before the crash, enough to blind the driver. Former MI6 agent Richard Tomlinson claimed he'd seen documents detailing the use of strobe flashes to disorient drivers. Official investigations, however, found no proof. All these details spawned countless theories about Diana's death. Even with the official ruling that the crash resulted from speeding and Paul being drunk, many refused to believe it was just an accident. Either way, Diana was gone. Witnesses said Charles was devastated. He was found at 6 a.m., wandering alone. No one has seen him racked with such a sense of frustration and confusion, wrote Daily Mail journalists Richard Kay and Jeffrey Levy. Over and over, he asked himself how it could be that the fresh and uncomplicated girl he married when she was 20 should end her life in the mangled wreck of a car speeding through Paris. The funeral was held on September 6th at Westminster Abbey. Over 1 million people came to pay their respects, lining the streets from St. James's Palace to the Abbey, throwing flowers and crying out their love. Walking behind the coffin were Diana's brother Earl Spencer, her sons, and Princes Charles and Philip. Charles Spencer later called that 30-minute procession the hardest moment of his life. Lady Di was buried on a secluded island in the middle of a lake at Althorpe, the Spencer family estate in Northamptonshire. During the 8-day mourning period, subjects left 5 million bouquets outside Buckingham, Kensington, and St. James's palaces. People also left balloons, toys, and messages. At one palace, visitors filled 43 condolence books. After her death, Diana's will was made public, stating her jewelry would go to her son's future brides. Kate Middleton received Princess Diana's iconic sapphire ring from Prince William, while Prince Harry's fiancée, Meghan Markle, was given an aquamarine ring and the Princess of Wales's wedding dress. But that wasn't her only legacy. Diana Spencer became a symbol for many, deeply influencing her own children. Years later, her younger son Harry would leave the royal family, breaking free from the system, something his mother never fully could. "We're doing what Diana tried to do," they said in the early days after announcing their decision. The Duke of Sussex also feared history repeating itself with his wife Meghan. Press harassment, paparazzi harassment, and lack of institutional protection. "I lost my mother, and now I watch my wife falling victim to the same powerful forces." Diana became a lasting symbol of defiance, hope, and self-determination. Not many could stand so boldly against a centuries-old system, head held high in that iconic little black dress. Sir Elton John dedicated Candle in the Wind to her, while Michael Jackson wrote Privacy. On her 50th birthday, the film Diana: Last Days of a Princess was released. Lady Gaga and Depeche Mode also paid tribute. She inspired not just artists, but influencers, like 2022's viral lookalike blogger Rose Van Ryn, who stunned audiences with her uncanny resemblance to Diana in styled photos. In 2017, the White Garden was planted outside Kensington Palace, a floral tribute of 12,000 white tulips, daffodils, and hyacinths around a rectangular pond. Hospitals, charities, and scholarships bear her name. Her legacy left a deep cultural mark. Diana shattered the ice-cold aristocrat stereotype. She showed that royals could be vulnerable, emotional, human, crying in public, hugging children, speaking openly to the press. She talked frankly about depression, eating disorders, and postpartum struggles, a near-revolutionary act in the 90s.
I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts, but I don't see myself being queen of this country.
And in the end, she lived her dream. Well, that's all from us at Biographer. Want more deep dives on your favorite celebs? Hit that icon on your screen. We've got plenty to surprise you with. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our new videos. Hugs! See you next time.